Okay, we're talking about the Battle of Bloody Shiloh. Now, where are we still at? Where have the Union has not completely taken this state yet. This is going to be, maybe the one that does. Tennessee. So, here's kind of the story of the Battle of Bloody Shiloh. On April 6th, 1862, picture this in your mind. On April 6th of 1862, Union soldiers were resting at Shiloh Chapel. On April 6th of 1862, Union soldiers were resting at Shiloh Chapel. What was Shiloh Chapel, Joe? Church, yeah, church or chapel. And yeah, a lot of people don't understand that chapel's a church, but it was a church basically that they were resting at. And it was in a town. It was in a town called Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee. And Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee was what they considered a riverboat settlement because it was on the banks of the Tennessee River. And it was a town that had a chapel in it. And Union soldiers were resting at that particular chapel. Now, Confederate General Albert Johnston does something that he has not done really yet in the Civil War, and that's go on the offensive. He's generally been on the defensive, but he's going to try to surprise General Grant and his troops that are resting at Shiloh Chapel in Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee. So he stages a surprise attack upon the Union there. And this battle is going to be called the Bloody Battle of Shiloh, or the Battle of Bloody Shiloh, whichever, because of the number of casualties. Well, basically this battle lasted 2 days. And because the South had the advantage of the surprise attack, after 6 hours or so of fighting, historians would tell you that the South probably won the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. So after 6 hours of fighting and having the surprise, element of surprise, the South kind of carries the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. However, on the second day, the Union received reinforcements. This population thing is going to be a big deal all the way through. And the Union receives these reinforcements, and they end up fighting off these stubborn rebels, and they push the Confederates back to another town called Corinth, Tennessee. So after getting handled a little bit the first day of the battle, the Union bounces back the second day with reinforcements, fights off this stubborn rebel advance, and pushes the rebels back to an area known as Corinth, Tennessee. Now, the battle ended in really kind of a what? Draw. Okay? So casualties become important. And there were a lot of casualties in this particular battle. Because what were the casualties for the South in the last one? Donaldson was captured, not so much killed, right? But captured. Well, you had a lot of death, and a lot of wounding, and a lot of maiming in this particular battle. And it was estimated that on both sides, both the North and the South, that approximately 24,000 men were either killed or wounded. 24,000 men on both sides were killed or wounded in the Battle of Shiloh. When you break down that 24,000, they estimate about 13,000 Union soldiers were killed in the Battle of Shiloh and 11,000 Confederates. So there was a lot of loss of life, more loss of life than any other battle to this point, absolute loss of life in comparison to what we talked about before. Now, among the Confederate fatalities was General Albert Johnston himself. And he's killed in a really kind of strange way. Now remember that medicine wasn't the same in those days. So among the Confederate fatalities, among those 11,000 Confederate casualties, was General Albert Johnston himself. What happened is he had been shot in the leg. A mini ball had nicked an artery in his leg, and it began to bleed out of control. Arteries are not good to sever. So he's shot in the leg, and because it nicks an artery, he begins to bleed too much. I'm going to pass around up here. This is a mini ball, actually from Lee's headquarters at Gettysburg. You can pass it back. But that's what he was hit with. Okay? Now, this was not necessarily at all a fatal wound. But what happens for you human anatomy and physiology students when you get a limb of your body bleeding profusely? How do you treat that in the wild, so to be? You'd put a tourniquet on it, would you not? And you'd put it below or above the wound. Shh. You'd put it above, closer to the heart. Well, no one around the general really knew about that or how to do it. Even though he had one in his pocket, it was never put on his leg. Now, the weirder part of this story is these big-time commanders in this war all had a personal physician that traveled with them or were in the vicinity. And Albert Johnston was no different. His personal physician was a doctor by the name of D.W. Yandell. And D.W. Yandell was assigned to Albert Johnston to treat him if he would get injured. Well, he's injured, and severely, although it's kind of, you know what I mean? You're bleeding, but you're not feeling, you're not down and out, but you're bleeding to death and you really don't know it, okay? No tourniquet. Well, why didn't, he's got a doctor right with him. Why in the world would he not be treated correctly? Close. During the battle, Johnston had ordered his personal physician to leave him and treat other wounded Confederate soldiers in the field. So his physician wasn't with him at the time. He did have somebody with him, however, but this guy had absolutely no knowledge of wounds or medicine. Traveling with the general also during the Battle of Bloody Shiloh was the Tennessee governor by the name of Isam Harris. Isam Harris was traveling with Johnston as well. And he was with Johnston when he was shot, but his doctor, unfortunately, was not with him when he was shot. So, Governor Harris didn't really know what to do, so he got General Johnston on his horse, and he guided Johnston's horse into a group of trees where he could get him off the horse and set him down and try to provide him some comfort from his leg wound, not knowing that he had severed an artery, okay? Not knowing that he was bleeding in his boot. Not knowing that he was bleeding so much in his boot that it was going to become an issue. So after being shot, General Johnston and his horse were guided into a group of trees by Tennessee Governor Isam Harris, who was with Johnston during the battle. And Governor Harris noticed Johnston was wounded, so he poured some brandy into the general's mouth to kind of ease the pain as the Confederate general sat below that tree and bled to death. And became a fatality of the Battle of Bloody Shiloh. Now, if I said there's no winner on either side, what did the battle accomplish? Other than nothing. It accomplished something. It was pretty good at it, too. It accomplished death. Actually, if you look at the Battle of Shiloh, it accomplished very little except for death. 24,000 casualties. Now, I'm going to have you write down a quote. I don't have you write them all down, but I want you to write this one down because General Ulysses S. Grant was later quoted about the scene after the Battle of Shiloh. Now, picture this in your mind. This is how he summed up the scene after the Battle of Shiloh. He said, and I'll repeat this several times, so don't panic. He said, quote, "After the battle, it would have been possible to walk in any direction stepping on dead bodies without a foot touching the ground." Now that's going to tell you something, but we'll get the quote down. His description of the Battle of Shiloh, the aftermath, he said, quote, "After the battle, it would have been possible to walk in any direction stepping on dead bodies without a foot touching the ground." After the battle, it would have been possible to walk in any direction, stepping on dead bodies without a foot touching the ground. One more time. After the battle, it would have been possible to walk in any direction, stepping on dead bodies without a foot touching the ground. What's that tell you, Caitlin? What's that tell you about this battle other than a lot of people died? Okay, and how would it be so blanketed? It would mean that the battle would be fought in a large or small area, pretty small area. So the concentration of the fighting was not spread out over a long distance. It was in a short area, and you basically, if you walked the battlefield, you couldn't walk on the battlefield without stepping on a body. Couldn't do it. That's how many were dead. I don't know if we can even fathom what 24,000 people laying there would even look like. Now, after this very bloody battle, President Lincoln started to get pressure about General Grant. President Lincoln began to get pressure about General Grant. What were people concerned about? Yeah, he wasn't concerned about the lives of his troops. That's a lot of troops. He was losing a lot of troops. He hasn't even started yet. I'll give you that much of a hint. This 24,000, actually only 13,000 his, didn't even start. He's very willing to sacrifice troops because of the population issue. And Lincoln started to get pressure that he should relieve Grant of his command because of the number of fatalities that were occurring during battle. And Lincoln did not agree. And he responded to his critics by saying, quote, "I cannot spare this man. He fights. I cannot spare this man. He fights." So Lincoln's getting pressure to relieve Grant of his duties because of the concern of loss of life at bloody Shiloh. When Lincoln receives that criticism, he simply responds to the critics, "I cannot spare this man. He fights." Now, there were some survivors. The youngest survivor of the Battle of Shiloh was a drummer boy by the name of Johnny Clem. Johnny Clem. Now, does anybody know what a drummer boy does?
He marches the beat.
March the beat. It's a weird deal. It's like you guys, before your basketball games, you put in this, I would add rotten music to get yourself kind of fired up for the game. Well, that's not exactly right, but when you marched in a battle of the Civil War, one person was responsible to hold the flag. If that person was shot and the flag dropped, somebody holstered their weapon or dropped their weapon or shouldered their weapon and took the flag. Somebody did that. That's what you did, was carry the flag. That was your job. And another thing they did it has, at Union, especially at drummer boys, that would use it for some inspiration in the battle. Well, Johnny Clem was a part of the Michigan Infantry, and he was the drummer boy. How old was he, Lily?
13.
Close. 12. Close.
10.
14. What?
10.
10. He was 10 years old. 10 years old. That would be a fourth grader? Is that what it would be? Yeah, well, there you go. He was 10. Now, there's a great story behind this because he showed some great bravery. Now, picture this in your mind. He's sitting there drumming into battle, and all of a sudden, and he's from the Union, keep in mind, all of a sudden a Confederate sharpshooter, sniper, shoots the guy right next to him, and the guy falls right at his feet dead. Well, all of a sudden, he's kind of shocked. He looks up and he sees a Confederate colonel coming at him. He picks up the dead man's rifle, takes careful aim, shoots and kills the Confederate colonel. 10 years old. 10 years old. Well, he ends up escaping the Battle of Shiloh unharmed, and he later earned the nickname Johnny Shiloh for his bravery. So he survives the Battle of Shiloh, which a lot of people didn't. And because of his bravery, he's given the nickname Johnny Shiloh. Keep in mind, he is a Union drummer boy from the Michigan Infantry. And your next question might be about him. What? What's that? Well, what happened to poor Johnny Clem, Johnny Shiloh? Well, he stayed in the Army, and listen to this, by the end of the Civil War, he earned the rank of sergeant. He went from lowly drummer boy, which might be lower than private first class, to a sergeant. How old could he have been? 62, 63, 64, 65. 3 years at the most. 13 or 14-year-old sergeant in the Union Army. Pretty impressive. So your next question might be what? What does he do after the Civil War? Come on, play with me here a little bit. What do you think he did? Stayed in the military until his retirement at the age of 65. He was in the Army 55 years. And he left with the rank of major. So Johnny Clem, a 7-year-old drummer boy from the Michigan Infantry who survived the bloody Battle of Shiloh, is a sergeant by the time he's 13 or 14, stays in the military until he's 65, and retires after 55 years of service. Your next question might be, what happens after that? Well, he retired, so to speak, lived 17 more years, and died at the age of 82. And what happened after that? He was buried, and on his tombstone it says, Johnny Clem, and underneath it, here lies the drummer boy of Shiloh. So on his tombstone it says Johnny Clem, obviously has his date of birth, date of death, and underneath it in quotations it says, here lies the drummer boy of Shiloh. That'd be kind of cool to see, wouldn't it? Well, in about 14 months you're going to see it, because the man is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And you'll get a chance to see Johnny Clem's gravestone there in March of 2019. So there you go. Okay, last subtopic. More Union victories in the Western Theater. More Union victories in the Western Theater. You know, with my mini ball. You notice that's pretty heavy, isn't it? How'd you like that thing in your leg? This is what they look like. These mini balls, and I'll show you several from different battles I have here, all are historically original that were dug out of the battlefields in which they're marked. That particular one was found at Lee's headquarters near Gettysburg, which we'll talk about later.
Doesn't that have a ghost in it?
They're not horribly expensive.
Ghost in where?
What's that?
Isn't there like a ghost at Gettysburg?
I don't remember. All right, now, in June of 1862, the Union forces captured two very important port cities on the Mississippi River. In June of 1862, Union forces captured two very important port cities on the Mississippi River. One of these port cities is going to lead to them finally gaining control of Tennessee. And what port city is that? What?
Nashville.
Nope. Close. On the Mississippi. Nope. The Grizzlies of the NBA play there. Memphis. So Memphis, Tennessee was secured by Union forces, which gave them control of the state of Tennessee. But what was the most important port that they captured that would get them control of the Mississippi River and cut the Confederacy in half?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Very good. So New Orleans was captured. Probably the more famous one. And the man that captured New Orleans for the Union was a naval admiral by the name of David G. Farragut. David G. Farragut was the Union admiral whose naval forces captured New Orleans for the Union. But, kiddos, there's one more port city that has to be taken before the Union finishes their strategy of capturing the Mississippi River and cutting the Confederacy in half. Anybody want to guess what port city they had not taken in the Western Theater by June of 1862? What states do we have to capture to get control? We already talked about Kentucky, right? That was no problem. This one was a bit of work. What about this one? Mississippi. In order to gain control and split Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas away from the Confederacy, they had to get Mississippi. The port city that they had trouble getting, Vicksburg. V-I-C-K-B-U-R-G. Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I'll tell you something, kiddos, and I'm giving you a little prelude to later. They will not capture Vicksburg until the later, and I mean much later, stages of the Civil War. These people will hang on like you will not believe. And they're basically outside of Vicksburg, lobbing cannon fire into that city unmercifully throughout, from this point till the end of the Civil War, when they finally succumb at the end. So they never do cut the Confederacy in half like they want to, because Vicksburg will not surrender. And I mean, you had a lot of interesting people in Vicksburg. You had rich people there because the shipping industry was huge. You know, a lot of shipping went on, a lot of shipping millionaires. Really nice southern houses. This was a beautiful, beautiful city in Vicksburg that is going to be bombed into submission and turned into a war-torn garbage pit, basically. And people they're starving them out, they're surrounding Vicksburg, nobody in or out, no medicines coming in, no food's coming in, no ammunition's coming in. The South is trying to hold it, the North is battering at it. It goes on for years. It's unbelievable, and we'll talk more about that. And you'll see a very good sample of that when we watch that drama movie I talked about called The Blue and the Gray. They just bombed them forever. Those people were resilient, unbelievably resilient, had great Southern pride. Okay, now, we're done. And what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to have an open note test. So we are going to report to the Commons, and we're going to take that open note test.